So we're back after 3 films. I think maybe I just want to open it up to any like initial impressions or like burning observations around the 3 films. If anyone wants to jump in before I lead a few questions towards Andy and the group. Oh, you gotta talk into the talking stick.
It was a great selection. No problem.
Yeah, it's self-serving like I wanted.
Burning praise for me? Anybody? I like the placement. I like the duration. Talking stick.
Someone's got a shuttle.
It would make more sense if somehow we were
I enjoyed the placement of each film because the first one was completely abstract. I couldn't see any images. I just felt like I was in a painting. And then the second one was very dreamy, like the way Paris can be kind of sexy, dreamy. And then the third one was so sad because of the World Trade Center, mostly for me, because I live in New York, but about him like spiraling out of control like throughout the film. So I enjoyed the 3 together in that order. I felt it was very important to get the message across. Louis?
I found it very moving. Like, what a emotional series of 3 films. I have to confess, I've always hated the whole discourse around flaneur. Like, I always find it very bougie. But then I was like, no, cruising, that's actually what it's supposed to mean. So I was very happy that I was connected to what flaneur was supposed to be about in some sense. And then it kind of morphed into something very normal. And now that's kind of, the last film kind of re-energized its out of controlness. Yeah.
Well, the middle film in some ways echoed my own ambivalence around situationism, how the idea of the dérivé, which has to work in a fairly public arena in order to make an impact, gets siphoned off by you have to be in the major leagues or you're not making an impact, becomes unless you're in the major leagues you're nobody, and that's the language of late capitalism. But I mean, in some ways, as part of the monologue in The Walking Philosopher, there's a couple of object references to people who think you can live in a world where you don't think about money. I was abstractly referring to a certain academic who once called me a capitalist for wanting to be paid.
Andy, maybe I'll ask you a question about The Walking Philosopher. I'm curious, can you like take us back to 1998? And I'm curious, like, where your mind was at, where were you at with your practice that you wanted to make a film that kind of directly commented on these kind of capitalist impositions?
The genesis of that film in some ways is I had an idea. I'd never made Super 8 before, but I had an idea for a Super 8 film before then called The Trouble with Oscar Wilde, which is about how the idea of fabulousness becomes trivialized into wealth for its own sake, and a certain snobbery and exclusionary, as opposed to the idea that anybody can be fabulous if they have the imagination, and that's largely taken off by exclusionary. So in some ways, similar ideas showed up later in my Super 8 film on video, the Headmaster's Ritual, about how Oscar Wilde in some ways degenerates into Noel Coward, who degenerates into the head prefect, who refers to the subway as the Peasants Express. And I mean, I went to school with people like that. So in some ways that's where it came out of, but it's just a loose thing. Like, I had written the monologue before, but I contacted, my ex, who's still a really good friend, James McSwain, who was going to be staying at me with the Images Festival. Could I stay with you? And it's like, yeah, if you bring your Super 8 camera, you can stay with me, because I have this idea. So we just went out, and it was originally going to be all-in camera edit, not nearly as many places, but we just while we're here, let's shoot this. While we're here, let's shoot this. So all the stuff around the U of T. And then it's like, yeah, and then that goes, the original script planned to go out to the beaches and the waterworks. And then Jim had an extra roll of black and white film, so that's where the whole bit about going, cruising the washrooms in the basement of the 401 building came from. And then most of it, and here's where I think of a difference between the feature. I'm behind the camera, except for the very last shot. That's very deliberate. It's from my point of view. It's like the Walking Philosopher, is like with the camera. The last bit, Jim shot it because I want to get my body onto the deck of that bar, that awful bar named after the bastardizes the OJs, money times 5. And he didn't keep shooting. And the owner from Money came out, saw me with, on his table, and had a fit. Get off my fucking table. And he didn't keep shooting. And the film would have been very different.
Why was it important for you to be in that last scene, not having been in it prior?
Well, I didn't have anyone I could say get on the table of Money. I mean, I wasn't working with any actors or other extra bodies other than my own, other than my friend helped the last shot. So it's got to be me. I mean, maybe that's also, I never quite lose the performative also myself, but for the most part, I'm walking behind the camera, and I'm much more distanced, I think, from the monologue than the last gentleman was with his numerous monologues. It's a very different style. He's a monologist, and he's almost stand-up.
Yeah.
Which, is something I have a like-dislike with.
When I interviewed you for my essay in the catalog, you mentioned that you were feeling particularly Marxist around those years. Could you talk a bit about how
I could say I had Marxist tendencies, and I still do in some ways. I mean, in some ways that's also maybe the fact that I used to also work in the service industry, and I have a very sort of almost Marxist take on the service industry. And all these pseudo-anarchists who were actually very anti-labor, I used to have to deal with them. You won't serve me after hours, you're a lackey of the bourgeois. Like, you're an alcoholic and there's a booze can around the corner, fuck off, I mean, I've always had a like-dislike with Marxism because, I mean, I have a like-dislike with systems in some ways, but the same with religion. In some ways, I'm quite passive. I could easily be someone who, I buy into this ideology, I do this, I do this, I do this, because I'm told I'm supposed to. But after a certain point, of course, I crack. Which probably makes me not at all unusual, probably makes me like most people. So, I mean, yeah, some of that was coming, I don't know, like, I don't think I was feeling particularly Marxist at the time, other than maybe I was going against the grain also of a lot of what people were doing in film and video. And it's like, oh, this is actually a film. But it's Super 8 is that film. That's not the industry, It's like...
Yeah, how did working in Super 8 change your process?
Well, in some ways, it's close. In some ways, that film comes out of documentary photography. Except... in a lot of documentaries, I have a tendency to distrust the voiceover or to distrust the talking heads or whomever. So it's like, I'll make the monologue blatantly performative and mobile. So in some ways, there is documentary in that film. I mean, there's documentary in the feature you showed too. But it's a different voice.
I can't help but think of the documentation of this conversation and the animated bodies.
Yeah.
Like I'm just kind of like, what will the future think of this moment? I don't know, it's kind of exciting to think about. They're all spastic.
so jazzed up.
It's quite a choreography.
But you think of,
Circle with
I thought recently, I used to go to this,
mosquito.
Louis, I mean, you would know this series, but I used to be fairly regular at experimental film programming thing that Scott Berry and Chris Kennedy and Kate McKay did called Early Monthly Segments, which used to be a monthly thing at the Gladstone. But they were into stretching definitions of also what's rigidly experimental also. And one, they showed a Marlon Riggs program. And you realize, like, in Marlon Riggs's films, which one might dismiss as being talking heads, no, those are moving bodies. Those people are dancing when they're testifying. Important difference. They're not just talking heads.
Unless there's any other questions about the Walking Philosopher specifically, I'd like to bring in Kate, Anthony, and Laura and talk a bit about the exhibition. I was really excited to chat with you guys about kind of the process of having it come into being. Earlier, Andy mentioned that it was almost a year ago today that it started. Maybe we could start there. What were the kind of initial seeds of Never Enough Night?
I think it's mentioned pretty clearly in the essay about Anthony and I reading the Lola Mag, where Andy Fabo mentions that it's overdue for a Andy Paterson retrospective. And we were around the kitchen table and we just like pulled out our computer and we're like, has it been done? And so we were looking at his CV, and earlier we had kind of talked to Kate about it as well, like the idea of doing it when she was at the AGO and kind of meeting him and exploring the idea of it being like a true museum show potentially. And then, when that didn't work out, I just decided to send him an email and say, we were thinking we could do it at the Plumb, like a retrospective, which we came to realize he doesn't like the term, so it became a survey. But and then we did coffee, and I think right away you were just like, well, I have these 2 new films, maybe they could show on one side of the Plumb. And then we were like, no, it's going to be way bigger.
Yeah, because I was originally thinking about smaller terms.
Yeah.
I had thought maybe of doing the performance that I did paint salt carpet that would generate residue, would sort of homage and also parody in some ways what was happening a lot in the early 21st century with relational aesthetics, or so many exhibitions you see where, well, there was a performance. This is what's left of it. That becomes the exhibition. And it's maybe a couple of steps above what I call look what the cat brought in art.
I think it goes back further than that too. I think when discussing it with Kate more than a year ago, the idea of shouldn't there be an Andy Paterson show at the AGO? There was Kate was on board to a degree that insinuated she'd thought about it herself. Like it was on other people's minds for a long time, I think. And doing it at the Plumb was sort of an effort to just quit the waiting, quit the bullshit or the hope or the and just try to seize some time and make it happen as soon as possible.
What's interesting is in some ways you took something that arguably is on a museum scale in a very non-museum space, and in a way wound up parodying museum show, and museum shows are certainly up for the picking, so.
Yeah, I think we thought you were deserving of a museum show, and of course we didn't have museum budgets. We were grateful to get the PIA funding for the book, but I think
And the incredible amount of volunteer time.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is that without ourselves and so many others volunteering time to do the tech, which we were totally incapable of doing, and do the design of the book, and just we had like certain teams of people that were doing things, and I think without that we wouldn't have been able to achieve it. Yeah.
Yeah, that film was in the exhibition. They programmed like, Jesus, how many videos and films did you program?
30 films.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a few that I said, no, not that piece of shit. But
You had veto power.
up to a point, I had veto power. Part of that is also letting go of that. If you're going to, if you're permitting 3 curators to work with you, you stop being the curator yourself.
And that's cruising. I think that's what the film. I think what you're talking about is cruising, like the artist wants to have veto power, and then the artist has to recognize, I have to let go of that. And the curators are like, we want to do a museum show, but we also don't want to wait. But that means we don't have the budget, but that means we're going to have volunteer power and PIA and whoever. And all of that added together, that's what cruising is in the movie. And it's, I don't know, to me it shows like another potential of how things can run.
It's true. I don't think there was much anti-cruise in this project, actually. Right? Like, there wasn't much, because he talks about anti-cruise as like it's kind of just always there. He can't really quite describe it, but he's like, it's gravitational. It's kind of like
It's like a barrier.
It's just, and I don't think we faced so much of that, which is kind of its own anti-cruise in itself, to not have that much resistance. I feel like we're so used to having resistance as creative people that when you don't, for me at least, there's a kind of psychological sort of barrier that comes in, which is like, God, if this project could be anything, then what should it be? And there's a real responsibility in that. But I think having an artist who just has so much work that I think most of us had only seen a few kind of works or a few pieces, or had seen screening programs here and there, and we'd all sort of stumbled onto the website, this amazing chaotic website.
That's something that's got to be adjusted.
If there's any web,
Well,
it's amazing in itself. It's almost a work, right? So we had that. That was the fullest approximation of your work. That's the most of your work that's in one place. So in a way, the show is sort of
I guess
like
one
your website.
could have gone back, because in some ways I have surveys, because in 2003, Pleasure Dome approached me to do sort of a survey of my video film work. And this tied in with an idea I had for a work which was a bunch of monologues. There's like 7 different monologues with a loose definition of monologue. Like one was a fake free jazz solo or whatever. But I hit on the idea of shooting like 7 Super 8 films and doing monologues in front of them, and I called the piece Monological. And it debuted in 2003 with Pleasure Dome and had a couple of other screenings. I think the last one, oddly enough, was in the middle of Looney Auto in 2008 at OCAD, where these idiots who run Luminato wanted to put together a Queen Street showcase. I think they had a budget. I think they expected my old band, The Government, to do a reunion, and I'm just not interested in that whole kind of... Yeah, that's the anti-cruise. People who would actually... The anti-cruise in a way is maybe people coming expecting to see old shit that I couldn't care less about. Although I actually had a fair bit of the old shit did good in the show, so... They had a choice to watch it or not. That's what you do in galleries.
I think much of anyone who was discussing, anyone who got to discuss this project with us a year ago, or maybe a little less, maybe gets a sense of how Andy's attitude towards the show progressively warmed from I'll give you 2 pieces to now. I he graciously let us into his house many times, yeah. And we pulled apart the furniture. In fact, yeah.
Collapsing under the weight of all of your material.
Yeah, of books, of like written word.
Useless history. Yeah, all this useless history. What's it do? Well, it collapses the furniture.
But we used to joke amongst ourselves in the beginning that wouldn't it be great to sort of get you to a point where you allowed or like accepted it as a show, but also could walk through it and sort of be like a little, not aggravated, but a little like disturbed or anxious about certain things, enough to talk about them, enough to sort of be like, oh, fuck this stuff, And,
As opposed to burying them or pretending they don't exist.
Or like just being totally thrilled with everything. Like I think there's, just like with the book, the collection correction title, I think getting you on a roll where you correct someone's memory is like especially delightful. Like I always really like when you like, someone told me about how you were the first book to be published by our Met and the first person to perform at the Harborfront Power Plant Theater, and you sort of nodded along and go, now that's not exactly true. And, sort of correct it, right? And I always thought that was...
Well, you get to a certain age, you get people telling you did things that you never did. I mean, if there's one person, if he tells me one more time he admired my performance in a dreadful play about the Cameron that I was expected to perform in, but I read the script and say, I don't want anything to do with this shit. And if there's one person, if he tells me one more time that's the best thing I ever did, well, I will fucking smack him.
I want to go back to this move from the idea of the AGO exhibition to the Plumb. I'm curious for you guys, what does the Plumb afford that the AGO could not? Because I feel like you could conceive of that, an easy, lazy reading might be that this is a step down. But what does working on a smaller scale or a more intimate? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, just allow me to say how, flattering it is for people at a space like the Plumb to give a shit about a geezer like me. Right? It's just flattering. I'm still dealing with the fact of it. I don't know. The AGO is so ludicrously in another world to me.
Yeah, and you can see what it really does as an institution right now, right? We can all see that. And right now I'm working on a show with Leah Gangitano at Participant Inc. in New York. And years ago, Leah curated a show of Greer Langton's work, and people would come in and see the show and be like, oh God, Leah, the show is so good, it's museum quality. That was the thing people would say to her, museum quality. And she's like, why is that the arbiter? Because a museum would never do that show. It took Leah to do the show, just like it took you three to do the show at the Plumb, right? Like Anthony's saying, not waiting around for the AGO or another museum to do it, right? So that's why I'm saying it's a step up. And I was talking to Paul P. once about Andy's work, and we were talking about the book that we had worked on together, and Paul was speculating as to why Andy hadn't gotten as much, why he was getting this belated recognition that continues to grow, and especially with the younger generation. And Andy said, well, I think Andy was much more sophisticated than his peers. He was too sophisticated. And I think that sophistication comes across in the show, the way that you're dealing with all the different media in a nuanced way, like having the bank of monitors and having them inert so the media is present and just focusing on the one at the time, or, the way you built out certain things in the show to think about space in relation to the concrete poems, like all that is super sophisticated. And I don't think a museum would have done it, but the three of you did it. So that's just something I wanted to say.
We did actually have someone from the AGO come and say, we could have never done it like this. And I was like, were you ever going to do it in the first place? But yeah, I think like the Plumb. I don't know if I should say it on record. But but it was sort of supposed to be insulting because like an insult to the show, in that it was I think specifically about the timeline, because they were saying like, oh, timelines have to be super accurate and we have to have everything defined in a timeline. But I was like, but this is also a piece, so it's not really like supposed to be a informative timeline.
Well, it's also the timeline which I sort of constructed for the exhibition. I was also maybe thinking a bit. I thought it might show up in my performance, Pate Salkarp, at one point, but it didn't. But I mean, that timeline very deliberately veers between events in the world or events in, dare I say, the local community that some people would recognize, and some that are, well, I use the initials, not the names. Or, yeah, I mean, it veers. I mean, it veers between the autobiographical, if anything, and then the anti-autobiographical. And I think that's a through line in my work, because I don't know. Maybe before the Walking Philosopher a long time ago, I went through a phase where there's no such thing as the self. And of course, I can't quite go along with that, because, you know, I mean, I have my own subjective beliefs, so I mean, I can't quite go along with that. But I've always been attracted to the idea. I mean, I actually tried to read Heidegger once. Yeah, see, little Johnny Dasein rocking the boat. There's you know, a lot of...
Just to go back to your question, Parker, about kind of the AGO / the Plumb. You know, and what you talked about, like, oh, this could be a museum quality show. It made me think about that scene in the last film about, like, well, everybody loves the grid. You know, as if all art wants to be the AGO, as if all the destinations of an art career and an artwork and an artist should lead to the AGO. And I think what the Plumb affords is what in the film they call, like, genuine. Like, he said, like, the highest value I can imagine is being genuine. And do you know how much effort it is to be genuine in a world that has a grid everywhere?
Yeah, but genuine to me is also the language. Genuine to me is also the language of advertising. These are genuine this or genuine that. They're not fake. You know, it's like, what's real? The last reel of this movie. I mean, I love grids, not all the time, but I love grids. I love art that isn't grids. And I tend to think when people say there is no grid, there is a grid. It's maybe more disguised, but there is a grid. I think there's very little that's free form, and I think there are grids everywhere. And I like grids. I like Mondrian because he only uses 3 colors, you know. I like boundaries.
Just thinking about what the Plumb could afford, it was certainly spontaneity along the development of the exhibition. We thought about how, like, if this was being done in a museum, it would be you know, of course it would give us more time to go deeper into the research, but it would also become so drawn out that it would become sort of predictable, or sort of maybe like dry in its process, right, and sort of suck the life out a bit. There's a level of spontaneity in the speed that we could do the project. There's also, you know, there was a few people that said comments like that at the opening. I remember this sort of, this could be at the AGO, you know, and of course at the Plumb, there's lots of people that share the sentiment that's here tonight, that, and they were saying it in a, you know, complimentary manner, because of course we would probably all prefer if these institutions did their job well, you know, but
yeah,
that'd be great, and I'd go again. But there were some other people there that night that, you know, were quick to yell out, like, fuck no, it's better here. You know, why would you? Yeah.
And physical barriers to access in terms of like money and needing a ticket to enter, and we don't obviously make any money at all at the Plumb, so anyone can come in, and then just having that access to your work, and for young people too, which I think is our main audience at the Plumb, to have them gain a new understanding of your work. Because I know early on you had said about including some of the older videos, you were like, oh, but everyone's seen that one, or, and then in talking to people since then, they're like, well, I may have seen it, but it was 20 years ago, and it's nice to see it again. So, and then for younger people that have never seen them, any of them at all, they kind of got a crash course on and can understand your work all at once, which is, you rarely get that opportunity.
Anthony, you told me something interesting, that it was a lot of the younger people spent time with the videos.
Yeah.
Well, it's the older folks who are looking through like the Delmont family tree and going like,
The ephemera, we heard.
how many dead people in this photo? Unfortunately, too many, or trying to identify all the people in those kind of shots.
Just to interject, we heard some older people describe it as was it the yearbook? The high school yearbook, that side of the exhibition, going through these sort of memory link archive moments. Whereas the videos for younger people, I think, unless you're super indulgent in that research.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff in there that's like, okay, because I was part of a network, I guess, with artist-run centers. I mean, you have an interesting history with artist-run centers since I got to know you. Well, before this, I mean, I remember at a party once at Versus where, we got talking about Western Front. Like you were asking me, because you've been talking about Western Front, and, did I know these people? And it's like, yeah, I know them, or whatever. But you've had an interest in these kind of sort of alternatives to a standard gallery model, or where a group of people share a space. I mean, Western Front and Versus in some ways had their similarities, I would say. But you get like, for example, there's a poster in the exhibition that just came down of, I think, everybody and their dog who ever did anything at A-Space between 1971 and 1996. And I mean, I have a thing for lists because of the absurd juxtapositions. I mean, I think the phone book is Dadaism, but I'm just walking along, I'm going like, okay, who am I expecting to see here? Michael Snow. Who comes before Michael Snow? Sue Smith. Who the hell is Sue Smith? I mean, if I wanted to be an artist and that were my name, I would change it. I would, get a kind of a more distinguished name. So, I mean, Michael Snow is on the level of, I don't know, is juxtaposed next to, I don't know, maybe the bass player for some lesbian fundraiser that happened at A-Space or something like that. They're all on the same level. It's leveling. That's the alphabet.
I was once in an Art Metropole fundraiser, and I couldn't believe that it was between Alfredo Yar and Jasper Johns.
I want to return to that. I want to pose a direct question to Anthony about this move from Versus a collaborative artistic practice to now being in more of this curatorial role. I'm wondering, do these distinctions matter to you? How has your engagement changed between these things?
I think they come down similarly they come to a similar place. They come from a similar place where I think I like desperately want to participate in cool shit. Like, and that's fundamentally however those things can manifest. And I have a deep distrust for like my own sense of truth, or like and so I love collaborating because I feel like I can get away from my own I guess, my own truths and sort of open myself up to other people's truths and grapple with that. And I find a lot more enjoyment out of collaboration than I do sort of like doing my own thing. I don't know what you call that alternative. I think of the Plumb and versus as having a similar attitude of collaboration, and I don't have to live with my collaborators anymore, which is really nice. Like, no, I think that's where they have a deep similarity that I think I value above most everything else. I think they also are. I prefer the underground as well. Like I do enjoy the DIY environment, and I like a speed of engagement that DIY projects allow for as well, that are very important to me. I hope that helps.
And I think one led to the other in a way, because Dan definitely approached you to join the Plumb because he knew you had a long history of collaborative work, and that could possibly lend some useful experience to a new collaboration that was going to be pretty big with a lot of people who also didn't really know each other. So anyway,
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Good for Dan.
Dan was participated. Dan used to run a gallery called Y Plus with 4 other artists, art people.
Daniel Griffin Hunt. Y Plus was out on Morningside in the sort of industrial park plaza. They were all University of Toronto Scarborough students, I think, finishing up their undergrad, and they were doing some good shows and some good little projects out there, and they sort of existed at a similar time as versus. So there was I think a peer relationship there. Yeah. So he knew me from that. And he knew a bunch of verses because he ended up going to his master's at Guelph. So I think he had sort of picked most of our brains about the profs there, and if he wanted to do it or not. Yeah. So it was, Kate, I feel like what's interesting to me about your curatorial work is that you move between a lot of different contexts, whether it's commercial, institutional, DIY, whatever that means. I'm curious, what do those different contexts do for you? What muscles do you flex in a situation like this that you couldn't in other places, or what interests you in working this way?
I felt a great deal of horror and responsibility when I was hired as a curator at the AGO. It's almost like I was that thing I described earlier of when you have no barriers, there's this real fear of, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? So being hired as a curator at that museum that we're talking about, as that place that should do the shows, I was petrified with, oh my God, okay, what matters? What the sheer responsibility of the curatorial role in a public museum, in a place like this that has so many issues, and everyone you talk to is that artist should have had a show. So everyone's got so many chips on their show and so much, brilliant points about what should be there. And I just was God, I'll probably get to push through maybe 1 or 2 shows in. The endless bureaucracy is so wild, and even getting one work from the collection on the floor takes 6 months. It's the opposite of speed. It's an exercise in just such patience, and so in some way I feel I'm always trying to, curatorial work for me has started to feel the side door that you can kick open at any point to get the air in and do something that you're not permitted to do in your employed life. Even working as a curator or as a gallerist now, it's the independent projects are so important. This kind of project, I think it's for that reason of what air can you get into the room. I feel I'm always sort of drawn to like the project that the format I'm currently working in that my grid doesn't allow for, that I'm looking for there's a lot of anti-cruise in life. There's so much anti-cruise externally and internally. And I'm more and more drawn to finding the cruise. And I agree with I've had a struggle with collaboration. Like, I've been more controlling about how I work, and I've found a lot of of richness in individual work, and I'm starting to ride the wave of collaboration more and see what happens when you throw your heads together. And somehow I feel I'm always trying to do the opposite of of the dominant thing that's in my life at the current moment.
Does anyone want to ask the curators or Andy any questions?
It just popped into my mind in thinking about the first time I met Andy, probably. So it might have been slightly before this, but versus in 2012 or 13, probably 12. You'd be able to tell me. Went to see the Enigma of SAP exhibition at Gallery West. Okay. 2013. He can tell me where we met.
I met you all earlier, though, because there was a fundraiser for Art Metropole.
That's right.
Where
Okay.
I did something and Versus did a thing.
Show, tell, and sell.
And there was... John McCurley was emceeing it, and of
Yeah.
course John McCurley is one of the funniest people I've ever known in my life.
And he kept ding-ding-dinging a bell to cut everyone off.
Yeah. Like he cut off Ann Ding, and Ann Ding's like...
She's...
continued anyways because
Yeah,
he
she
just cut off
stared
Ann
at
Ding.
him and was like, didn't respond.
He cut off
just
Philip
kept
Monk, and I
talking.
expected Philip Monk to just, excuse me, I'm Philip Monk, you don't cut me off. And Philip just went, oh, and left, you know. But it's like who take up the space more, and it seemed like there's some kind of a tie-in between Life of a Craphead and Versus. But during the course of that evening, I sort of struck up a friendship dialogue with different Versus members, Anthony, Laura, Simon, Florida, Wallace, James Gardner, all of them, So I think I was invited down to your place one night, and it was terrible weather, and Laura and I were just gabbing away, and we got shit-faced.
Well, this is what I was going to get to, was that there was multiple times that Andy followed up and came to the warehouse. And these are very special memories for me, I think, that were for I think probably a lot of Verses, because Andy came with stories, but he followed up with books, and he kind of connected us to, sure, we were asking about the Western Front or whatever other people, and Andy was there with a lot of stories and a lot of rich gossip.
Well, you were gossip about the faculty at Guelph.
Yeah, you told me.
We largely did.
You told me, gossip about the fast worms, and then I got to sort of play that back with the fast worms and get gossip about you from them.
I'm sure
you know.
They did. And we're not talking about the Napa issue either.
I'm a devout donkey. I got no comment.
You're a mule. You're going back and forth.
Thinking about that Lola issue as kind of like the spark that generated this like larger project. Yeah, that's right. And I'm thinking about kind of like Parker's project, which is, I always say to you, like everything you do, you leave traces, right? Like you leave documentation that it's like you're this recording and this conversation is like the next Lola, and what I find amazing is that like in this conversation, you're laying out like the Lego blocks for the next pulse. You're saying like Guelph links to Versus, links to the Plumb, links to Y+, links to Pumice Raft. And who knows what the future will do with those Lego blocks. They might come together in ways we never imagined. They may not be true or accurate, but you're laying down the blocks. And I find it just like very beautiful to listen to you speak. And, like Kate, you use a metaphor of like curating as like letting air in. And I'm like, that's your knowledge right now. And you're now casting that into a future that we won't know, and I don't know, Anthony, like you talked about, like I'm desperately searching for like cool shit, and I took that to be like, it's like it's kind of like the film, like the cruising film, like a kind of desperation for like something that gives me life, and that's what I'm taking from this conversation. And I just want to like, I don't know, I love it.
Well, the opposite of letting air in is letting the air out.
Suffocating.
And therefore flattening or sucking the oxygen out of the room, or whatever the expression is. The opposite of that is letting air in, allowing space to float and fly.
Just want to thank you for being such a good storyteller and a good I guess knowledge keeper for the city, right? There's not so many people that have these stories and these books and these things to share. I think.
Take your fake memories too. You can make it up. We'll still listen.
No, but I mean, sometimes, I do like a lot of people. I don't recognize them when they're not in the location I associate that person with, and it's like, nah, but that's reducing a person to that one particular location. Like most people have more than one site of activity, unless they're, well, most people do. Even 9-to-5ers have their home where they're completely different than their home, and then with people with similar names, it's like, I confuse my Kates, I confuse my, Michaels. It starts to happen.
That's what concrete poetry is for.
Yes.
I have a question for the curators. Do you each have a work that you like the most or miss that you wanted to put in the show?
I like that bonus. You want to go first?
No.
Sure.
I have a clear one that Anthony made fun of me for. It's Immortality. It's like an early.
I regret that so
It's the
much,
second
too.
earliest
I'm so
video work that
infatuated
we
with it.
show. It's from 87. Yeah. Yeah. I love Immortality. It's like there's so much in it that's like seductive. It's like about this celebrity who it's this fictive dramatic soap opera kind of video where all of these like people in this celebrity's life, like the chauffeur and the music video director and the ex-lover and the accountant, are all interviewed, and they all have different things to say, and there's about this celebrity, and there's who's a musician, and there's some of it's kind of autobiographical and some of it's not, and there's this weaving of fiction and there's this weaving of persona and flamboyance and performance.
And some people thought it was a cross between Citizen Kane and Spinal Tap.
And there's so many filmic references, and there's noir, and it's just so much that's actually what your work is about over the next 4 decades. And it's musical, and Andy also does musical, like the character whose name is Norman Desmond, and it's Sunset Boulevard. It's very Sunset Boulevard, and it's so rich and excellent, and it's just, your mouth is wide open the whole time. You're just like, yes.
I always thought that
so
piece.
fabulous.
I always thought that piece was a bit like a bowel movement. It had to be done.
Well, just a quick interjection. We just a few weeks ago, Michael Klein tells us, "Hey, I got a record that you didn't have in the show." And we're like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Like, there's no." And he goes, and he's, "Yeah, it was a pressing, a single pressing of in the character of Norman Desmond, an A and B side track." That was done before the movie, before the film. It was done as part of the performance at the Harborfront, before the Harborfront Center, I guess at the Harborfront, whatever it was.
Curated by Ihor Holubisky. He had brothers Theodore and Beth someone from New York who did a boring piece about boating or something.
The song was amazing. The record's incredible, so I look forward to...
It's a bit...
It's in the Art Metropolitan Collection at National Gallery.
There you go.
It's a bit gothic.
Your singing is so haunting. It's amazing.
Information there then about it. Good.
Oh.
A little bit, well, just the sleeve.
Okay.
I thought it was basically yet another David Bowie parody, but in the 80s I was so off him, I thought so many people can do him better than he does himself anymore, so here goes another one.
What's
know.
yours?
Mine? I think it's been since the beginning Basic Motel. And I think it became more so in talking to you about it, Andy, like just the show in general. I think we were at an opening at Paul Petro's and you had said something like, I've tried so hard to make myself invisible after so many years of being hyper visible. And I was like, oh, I don't know if the show can make you invisible. I'm so sorry. But but I think in the character in the film, the movie video, he like tries to kind of hide away. And so I thought about that more so. And also just the nostalgia of you being so young and
Smoking.
just, yeah. I just love that. I just love it. And I think it was one of the first ones that we all free watched together. And it was just like a magic moment.
But of all damn people, Mike Hoboom just found that thing. You know, I mean, I never thought much of it. It's just an early piece. I didn't even have it in distribution, I think, or it's still at V-Tape. But you know, whatever V-Tape distributes is a whole other issue. V-Tape, don't get me started in some ways, but
we thank
Mike
V-Tape
Hoboom.
a lot for their support of the show. Of
They
course.
did a lot. Yeah, I've become more mellow about them now. But Mike Hoboom found that, and he phones me up when he still phoned me up and said, Andy, this is what you've been doing. Forget all that arty shit you're doing. This is what you've been doing, narrative. Because Hoboom connected to it, because he connected the pop star who goes missing with the character in The Disposables, which Art Metropole published in late 1986, who in some ways is like a Bowie-scaled pop star who goes AWOL because he thinks he might be wanted for murder. So he decomposes in a hotel, you know, which you it becomes kind of like, it's a bit, I mean, The Disposables, it's a bit like Raymond Chandler's version of The Picture of Dorian Gray. But he made that connection. And I mean, I think in one of them, the character's name is Robert Monitor, and the other one, the character's name is Richard Monitor. You know, are they the same person? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe another version would be Joe Monitor, I don't know. But
What's your favorite in the show?
narrative.
Is that the one that says and?
Yeah, and then finally it becomes and. But it's also about me being a barely closeted color-filled abstract painter. You know, it's just all about the different colors and different color combinations. I mean, I saw that again for the first time in ages in a time-based format. You know, and I mean, I was also music, because I have an electro band I do with my friend Kevin. You know, I mean, I thought, well, narrative basically is something to just have on the background when we play, because it's just, and you loop it, and somebody might notice, like, oh, it says end. Now it goes back to and, you know. I mean, I'm tempted to say that's my favorite of my videos, but I might say something different, you know, in a half hour.
I think my favorite thing
or something. I might, you know.
my favorite in the thing in the show, probably towards the end, that I became really obsessed with was the magazine articles that we scanned in the research, sort of like late stage archive development before the show. I realized there was all of the out of print, magazines, Impulse, Mix, Parallelogram, Fuse, juxtapose. What else?
But there were those
Parachute,
impulses.
Vanguard,
Also, there were those-
Lola.
But
yeah,
there were those impulses.
that you
This
painted
started
over.
with when Jacob and I did our book, Collection Correction. There was a launch and an exhibition at Cooper Cole. And I got the impulses from which texts were published in Collection Correction, and then kind of did an abstract painting thing on the impulses.
Those are really nice, and
Yeah.
I like how.
Which means if you want to read my shit, buy the book. 'Cause it's not an impulse.
Yeah. Well, but going through all the magazines, it was incredible to just like take out any magazine and you'd spot Andy's name right away. Just like
Like every table of contents, there was your name.
every table of contents, it felt like every other magazine there was an article on Andy or an article by Andy.
Not that much. I mean, people get their look at file. People are hot property for a while. Then enough of this person.
He,
doing a
he was
lot of
stretched out
writing.
over 5 or 6 magazines, you know, and
I'm
it
talking
became,
about the
and
buzz,
it was
buzz,
really
buzz, the
eye-opening because
gossip
I'd
section
never
of
had
Fire.
those in my possession. I have Lola collection. I don't have any of those earlier ones, and accessing some of that information became really interesting, and it kept happening at a point where I shouldn't have been working on the archive anymore. Yeah, it was like a weird ADHD obsession though, where you're just like, nah, I got to keep digging here though, you know, I'm on a roll, you know, and then, you know, the way we formatted it with the what do they call them, the pockets or what, the wall pockets, filed like that with the cover of the magazine and then just the relevant article. I thought that became like a real favorite of mine, and it was really cool to see that shit. But yeah, the Impulse magazine that you painted over is an obvious choice as well. Yeah, it's so good.
Remember at the Cooper Cole, somebody actually inquired about buying them. No, it wasn't you. I think it was like.
But it was also Louis.
Okay, there's one person I remember, Nicola Feldman Kiss or something like that. You know, Simon comes over and says, "Don't sell yourself short." No, you know, I'm just not even thinking in those terms that night.
It's true, don't sell yourself short.
Do you want to say anything else, Anthony?
It's okay.
Laura?
Thank you, Parker. This is really a lot of fun. Yeah. We're all gonna go home happy and a little itchier than we were
Yeah.
before.
Just
Yeah, I
let's
mean,
thank
up in
all the
Durham the other night,
mosquitoes
there
who
was-
have died.
Yes, and thank you, Andy, for all you do.
Thank you. I mean, I just cannot thank these three. I just cannot thank these three enough. And I mean, if they want to make you over, lay back and go with it. I mean, John Goodwin kind of advised me to do that, and you did the Plumb did a very interesting exhibition with John Goodwin, speaking of Guelph, in 2022. And John's like, you don't have to do it, just let them make you over, let them go over. It's like, yep. You can have fun as a consenting bottom.
John said something really nice. He followed up with me after he ran into you, and said something like, "Yo, Andy's a little nervous about it or something. I don't know. I just told him it's gonna be fun. You know, like you know, whatever happens, you're gonna have a good time. Like, and then he sort of thought about it for a moment. He goes, I think I said something like, Andy, you've had a life where your taste and your judgment is based on some mistakes that you've made in your life, and you should let them make their mistakes as well."
At my expense? I don't think so. Nah, being a guinea pig can be, you know, just let go and be a guinea pig. I don't mind being, you know, someone that, a cipher. What did Fellini say about Donald Sutherland?
What?
Didn't make any mistakes.
Sounds like a joke.
You can project, he's the most boring person in the world. You can project anything onto him.
I can remember the fast rooms gossip now.
On that note, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Andy, Kate, Laura, Anthony, for coming after work. Thank you, Chris, for doing audio.
Thank you, Parker. Thank you, Chris.
I heard that. David Buchan told me that.